Good evening. Nice guy Eddie here, talking weapons again. Tonight I want to talk about a piece that I brought back from Bali, from a trip that I took there in 1991. Bali is an island in Indonesia. Indonesia is basically an archipelago nation. I don't know how many islands there are, 1,000? There's a lot of islands in Indonesia. I don't have the number in front of me, so forgive me if it's way less than that, but Bali is one of the islands in Indonesia. It's a beautiful island. Highly recommend if you're ever traveling that part of the world. Bali is definitely worth checking out. And this was a piece that I brought back from Bali, as I say, from a trip in 1991. Now, I mentioned in the last video that at this time in my life, my family lived in that part of the world, in Guam, the Southwest Pacific Ocean, and so traveling throughout Asia to Bangkok, Hong Kong, Bali, etc. It's not like flying there from the States. It's like to go from Aganya to Bali was flying from Detroit to LA or Chicago to Atlanta. It was just a flight. That's where we lived. We took advantage of it, and so I had the opportunity to do some traveling out there. And while I was there, I picked up this weapon here. Say weapon. So it's not exactly. I don't count this one among my functional pieces, and I'll explain why in a moment. But this is a Balinese Kriss. A Kriss is a long dagger. You could almost, I don't know that I would call it a short sword. I think it blurs the lines maybe between sword and dagger. It's certainly larger than any other dagger that I own, but it's not, I don't think I could really legitimately call it a sword either. So I would put the Kriss in the category of dagger. It has some unique features. Obviously, the most striking is the curved, wavy blade, which I have to believe would be really difficult to sharpen the entire way. You can't just put it on a grinder and let it go. You'd have to, I would imagine that would be difficult. And this one is not incredibly sharp. I'm not going to like grip it and run my hand along it. That would probably cut me, but for the most part, not really a functional edge. Now the blade itself, I'm going to move this closer to the camera so you can see, it has this silver swirly pattern in there. Now I'm not 100% sure about the construction of the blade. I swear it is so soft and feels like I could just snap this handle right off that I swear it was just forged out of iron, and then what they did was to drizzle in some steel, like so much sauce over a pizza, and then swirl it a little bit. It may just be that there's different steels, and that some of this is blackened, and they've etched away some of it via acid or whatever the process is. I'm not exactly sure. I did actually think at one point that it was iron, but I'm kind of doubting that now as I look at it. But you can see again the swirl pattern on the blade. This flange down at the bottom, which has some concave details in it. What should it be in front of my head? Yeah, there we go. Um, and then, of course, the other striking feature about the whole piece is the intricate craftsmanship and woodwork that goes all the way down the blade. I'm going to move it in a little bit closer there, so you can see that's the handle. Now the hilt, that is the pig god. It's said that the pig god leans to the left in his dance. However, I'm looking at this. This is a dancing pig god, but I swear he seems to be leaning to his right. Whatever, pigs lean to the right, even in Bali. And then, of course, you've got this swept area here, looking a bit like the bow of a ship. There are other faces on it. There is a face here. There's a face here, and again, I'm going to come in real close here. I'm just going to go run along the entire length of the scabbard, all the way down, and give you a real look. Every inch of it is carved with all these intricate details. And I'm on the back side as well. It's just a beautiful piece, incredible craftsmanship. And this is not necessarily, again, I bought this as a souvenir. So while this is a beautiful piece, this is, I think, God, at the time, I want to say I paid. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment, because there's actually a second piece that goes with it. So, in terms of it being a functional weapon, I mentioned that the metal is really soft, and I mean, I just don't think it would take a lot of abuse. I feel like it would break off here. I've mentioned full tang in the last couple of videos, and now a couple times I've said that I believe this only goes down to about halfway through the handle. Again, held in place with glue or friction. So this is not something that would take an awful lot of abuse. I don't think. Not this piece. I'm not saying that a Kriss in general couldn't, but this one was meant to serve as a souvenir. The other thing, I'm not crazy about this. There's a design feature on this, and it's true on most swords, but it's particularly pronounced here. And I want to show you that right there. Not the little ring with the fake jewels, but rather the fact that the blade comes down and then gets very narrow right in this area. It gets very narrow and then drops down to the handle. That's a feature on a lot of sword blades as they go into the hilt, and then the handguard is put in place and the pommel is either screwed on or peened on, as applicable. But it's a stress concentration because you have an interior right angle here on both sides, and if it's relatively soft metal, that's gonna when you put a load out on the end of the blade, that load is held by this little tang down here, and with those inside radii being so sharp, it's huge stress concentration. I'm always thinking that's just going to break right off. Now, in the case of a well-made sword, that's not going to happen. In the case of this, which is very nice looking, but it was not made with combat in mind. It was made with tourists in mind. I would say, yeah, I would bet it would probably break. Now I do. The other thing I should mention. Whoops. Aside from the fact that this does occasionally, it fits very well in the scabbard, but sometimes it gets stuck and doesn't go in very well. The other thing I should say on the same trip is I also got the letter opener version. Now this would fall under dagger, although I would almost say, as I say, this is more like letter opener. But it's basically a smaller version of that. You do have the pig god on the top. You have the second face. So very, very similar, and again, very well carved. Now, I mentioned earlier what I paid for them, and this is the interesting thing about both of these. If I remember correctly, it was either $15 or $20 for the pair. Bali at the time, very low cost. The dollar was strong. They also had a lot of the street vendors with the Nikes and the Gucci watches and whatnot, but and a lot of clothing, very cheap. Everything was very cheap there. It was a very affordable place to be at the time. Now this is 1991, so take that with a grain of salt. But again, for both of these pieces, I think I paid $15. I want to say this was 10, and the smaller one was 5, maybe, or however it worked out. I think I paid 15 for the pair. And fast forward a couple of years, 1990, mid-90s, 95, I guess, summer of 1995, I was working a temp job in Washington, D.C. at the World Bank. And yeah, I had the coolest temp job in the world. I was at the IT desk at the World Bank. Anyway, I'm working in Washington, D.C., and as I'm walking back to the metro, I come across a street vendor, which they had in D.C. at the time. I don't know if they're as prominent now with post 9/11 and security, and of course, post January 6th here. I don't know if they've done more to sort of push those guys away from the monuments or the area where the tourists go, which is also, consequently where a lot of the business folks are walking as well. But I come across a street vendor, and he's got a blanket. He's out on the sidewalk. He's just on the ground with a blanket and a bunch of, exotic wares from Far East Asia. That's how he was selling it. And I see this piece, this identical sword. I mean, it's a fairly traditional design. I mean, you can find an identical piece to this fairly easily. I mean, I don't know that you can necessarily say it's mass produced because they're all done by hand, but which is what amazing when you think about the time that went into this. And I paid, like I say, I want to see $10 for it or something like that. But I saw this being sold in Washington, D.C. on the sidewalk by a street vendor for $85. Just this one piece. $85 in 1995 dollars. So figure, I don't know what that is today, but it's significantly more. I mean, double it? I don't know. But yeah, $85 for something where I had paid 15 or 20, I think 15 for 2 pieces. Anyway, good trip. The only other thing I want to say about the Kriss, there is a long spiritual history around it. That these are heirlooms and status symbols, ceremonial pieces. I mean, one of the things you can kind of see where this kind of a dagger might be used in a more ceremonial manner than actual combat purposes. But there is a spirituality around the Kriss, and there are those that will view this as carrying a sort of a spiritual embodiment, or almost like a magical talisman. So if I'm wearing a Kriss, there are those that might believe that not only can the blade defend me in a physical sense, but that the spiritual energies of it might also serve to protect me as I go through my life. Which, I'm not a spiritual guy. I'm not a religious guy. Those who've heard my other stuff probably have gleaned that by now. But I do think it's kind of cool to know that I have a piece that at least some people might actually believe has that kind of power imbued to it, if you will, that might view it as not just a weapon, but as a talisman. So if you find these videos interesting, please like and subscribe. The next video we will be talking about, whoops, I still got to get used to that camera. We'll be talking about these two Turkish daggers off to my right. Thank you very much, and good night.